everybody, I'm Ebony Love of Lovebug Studios, and right now I want to talk to you about using a limited color palette to design quilts. Now, when I am typically designing, I use an electronic software program for quilt design. And what typically happens is I'm working with a palette of fabrics. They could be solids, they could be prints, but I'm usually working with lots of different colors. And in those cases, it doesn't matter if the colors are true to form. But as you start to limit your palette, it becomes more important to really recognize the balance of your lights, your mediums, and your darks. And that can sometimes be hard to do when you are looking at a computer monitor. So here's an example of a printout from my quilt design software. And it looks one way on the screen. When you print it out on the printer, it looks some other way. So I decided to order fabric to try to figure out, well, what were these colors that I was seeing on the screen and on the printout, and how does that actually translate to the fabric that shows up? Well, when the fabric arrived, these were the fabrics that I ordered. And when I was looking at the fabrics on screen, I also didn't know, well, if I really wanted a medium, aqua, or teal, what color is that? So you probably don't order as much yardage as I do, but I tend to order swatches in yards rather than ordering swatches in fat quarters. But whichever way you choose to do it, it's always a great idea to order multiple fabrics if you're not sure what colors you're going to get. Another idea, and what I did to choose the color palette for this particular project, is I took a photo with my camera and I changed the photo to black and white. And that helped me to figure out what was the balance of light, mediums, and darks in the three colors that I wanted to use. So that's just a tip for you for working out color balance. So when I did that, I discovered that this fabric does not really go. So that fabric got eliminated, and this was the palette that I wanted to work with. Well, the other thing that I noticed as I was playing with this pattern is that I didn't really know which fabrics I wanted to use for the center blocks and which fabrics I wanted to use in the bricks. And so to get all of the different combinations, I needed to cut the block centers out of each of the fabrics. So you'll see these here. And then I did pieced bricks in each color combination. So you'll see there's a set of pieced bricks here with the lime green and the aqua. And then this is the swapped version of those two. This is with the teal and aqua, and again, the opposite units. And then finally, the lime green and the teal. So I was able to, from these three fabrics, generate these 6 combinations of bricks to play with. And from this point forward, it really is just play. And I love playing with design. So I'm going to show you just a couple of different things that happen when you're working with these different combinations. So this particular block is set up like a pinwheel. And so I tried some different combinations. So this is the original design from my sketch, from my digital sketch. And so that's what this design ends up looking like. Now, what if I wanted to make the center recede? Perhaps I would swap it with a different center and just make this more of a solid space here. I could also try it with the lime green and see what that looks like. So that's one example. Another option, so here I've used 2 different combinations of bricks, but the smaller segment is the same color. Here, in this example, I'm using the darker fabric, the teal, as the smaller segment of the brick. And so instead of doing opposites, I've pushed the same colors to the outside. Another option that I tried was, well, what happens if I actually just change out the center here? So when you have these different combinations, you're able to really play. And that's the advantage of using a limited color palette, is that you can generate these samples very quickly and use these to play. And like I said, if you're worried about wasting fabric, these can all get pieced into the backing. Now, once you have several sample blocks made, you'll also want to try them in combination. One thing that I like to sort of pay attention to is how these colors actually play with each other as you get more blocks. So I've done a couple of blocks here, and I tend to like to do opposites. So I'm just gonna make some room here on the table. And so here are two examples of blocks that I played with. And so you can see what happens with this limited color palette is you start to get a secondary design. And sometimes that can be hard to see if you're using a bunch of different colors. It can be really challenging to see some of those secondary designs unless you're using like a single background color in the design. But here with this simple color palette of just 3 colors, you can really see how these different shapes and colors interplay. So here I have driven the lighter color toward the center, and that tends to make it recede. Another option, if I rotate this around, is I can move these to the outside here. And so now that center is not as prominent, and I've pushed that really bright color toward the outside so you don't see that pinwheel effect as much. The other thing that you can do is play with more of a monochromatic look. So here is a sample where I've got these darker fabric on the outside with the medium fabric in the center. And as I played with these, I really wanted to see how can I really take this color combination and really make it pop. So here is the other thing that I played with. And what's really interesting is that once you start to play, you get further and further away from probably the original sketch. So in this example, by alternating these colors, you can really see these darker colored centers really start to pop, and the rest of the block recedes, where in this combination, you really see the darker color is very prominent in the block, and you don't see the center as much. It's really interesting to play with these different block combinations as you get these samples made. And one more option here, which I think is really amazing, and this is probably what I'm going to end up stitching together for my quilt, is just using this lighter color very sparingly in the blocks. And this is something that you might not really get just working from an electronic sketch. Sometimes it's easier to see what you need to do by actually getting it out into fabric and working on a design wall. And as you can see, the colors from my printout aren't really all that close to what the actual fabrics are. So it's always great to get a sample of that. So, and in this quilt behind me, you can see how that limited color palette really comes to great effect. You can use the darker color to really project out and draw attention to the blocks and the shapes that you're trying to make. So I hope you have fun trying this technique and really using a limited color palette to punch up your next quilt.